Building in Elizabeth Street. Please be aware that this meeting has been live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please remember to speak clearly into your microphones and only one speaker at a time for clarity, please. Could everybody please turn off their mobile phones? All right. We're going to get to the clarity. Rick, are you able to do a karakia for us? Is that no?
Or maybe Kevin.
Kev, how about you? Oh, when you're ready, I'll come with you. Let's carry on with Councillor Kev. Righto, Councillor Schuler.
Okay. Po hirihiri, po rama, po o te whakaaro, po o te tangata, po o te aroha, te po e here nei I a tātou. Māori ora ki a tātou, haumi e hui e, tāhiki e. Kia ora.
Thank you. Do we have apologies? So
Steve is just online.
we have Councillor Morris who is coming in online. And as previously announced, Makaire Sydney is still on leave of absence. So I'd like to move Rick and Mahi. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. There is no one speaking to the public forum this morning, I don't believe. Any late items? No late items. Confidential business to be transferred into the open. Change to the order of business. No. And confirmation of minutes. So we have the minutes of the Project Planning and Monitoring Committee held on the 21st of October 2024. Are there any corrections to the minutes as presented? Councillor Schooler?
I was actually there. As noted in the, I did second of you and I moved a couple of things.
Right, we'll have that amended. Just for completeness as well, there was public, that item 11, public excluded business, be deleted as the committee did not go into public excluded to consider the attachment 9.1 7th Avenue cul-de-sac. So that will be amended in the minutes as well. Any further amendments? Councillor Crowther.
Item 9.1 doesn't have the complete committee resolution. Let me see. I just noticed that there was a C that was missing. I presume Coral has that noted down from the meeting, do you? It was kind of the main action point from it. Let me see if I can pull it up. It was to request staff engage with the affected parties and the wider community and provide a report on the findings of the engagement and potential options relating to the 7th Avenue cul-de-sac.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. We'll have that added. Anything further? In the case, can I have someone move the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Schooler. Seconder, Councillor Schuler. All those in favour? Against? Declarations of conflicts of interest. Do we have any? No? Righto, we'll get down to business. Item 9.1, project performance, October 2024. I think we have James coming in online. He's a little bit off colour, so he's working from home.
Morena Tato. Yes,
Nick, you'll introduce him.
that is correct. James Woodward, he's dialing in. You know James from previous meetings, Manager Performance Monitoring and Assurance. He'll give us a run through of market insights that have appeared since the previous meeting, and then we've also got a procurement update in that slot, which has been asked for, what we're putting to the market and under which process, etc. And then we will hear from the project delivery divisions respectively after that. Thank you.
Good morning, through the chair. So the month of October, 4 months into the year, the capital expenditure has been at 156 million. Just move to the next two slides. Thanks. And the next slide's fine. Yep. So that's running at.
Sorry, James, are you able to just pause for a sec? We're just trying to get the volume up a bit, mate.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go again.
Yeah, sorry. So expenditure is 156 million to the end of October against a year-to-date budget of 169. That's about 31% increase from last year. At the moment, we're forecasting slightly over budget, but that's probably as a result of just a few projects that are still going through a process, particularly in the annual plan around where they land, and a lot of that forecast is sitting in June. So based on where we're at the moment, I think we're going to land pretty close to 500, maybe just short. So we're well on track, despite, I guess, a lot of disruption from a funding point of view and the annual plan process. From a procurement point of view, so we've supplied a couple of tables in there from procurements that have occurred over the last 3 or 4 months, and then planned procurement activity over the next 3 or 4 months. And the project teams can probably talk to that in a little bit more detail about what's coming up in their space. Just go to yes, down there. So we've also attached a report. Oh, so you can go back one slide, sorry. We've also attached a report, so we engaged GHG to provide us a 6-monthly update on cost escalations. So we get this in addition to the bill information that we receive through local government, because it provides us a bit more granularity in terms of what assets we're planning to do over the LTP. The forecasts coming through just indicate the cost escalations have calmed down quite a lot. That's pretty common knowledge. It's reasonably well aligned to CPI, and it falls in that kind of bracket of 2 to 3%. You'll notice in the attachment that the major inputs have all reduced in their highs, and what I've got here is actually quite up-to-date information from Stats NZ. This shows concrete production, and it's a pretty good indicator of where the economy is kind of sitting at the moment. So this is mainly driven through commercial and residential building activity, but that obviously flows on to the cost of those elements in the civil space. So you use this. The ANZ also have a truckometer, which you may have seen previously. That is also indicating a pretty similar kind of profile of things slowing down. So the economy is in a interesting state at the moment. It's forecast to pick up in the next kind of probably 9 to 12 months, but at this stage, costs are plateauing a bit in the sector. Next slide, please. So here's just an updated slide on I guess a variety of parameters across the capital program. So In the top right, you can see our budget is 501, and we're estimating we'll be at about 520, but I think the number will come down by the end of the year, and obviously we'll monitor that, and we've got to keep within the financial limits anyway, so we'll just control that throughout the year. You can see the overall, so we call it RAG status, red, amber or green, so most of the projects are in a pretty good state. There are a number of red projects, which the teams will talk to as well. Predominantly the red status projects are driven more by time and scope rather than cost at this stage. And you can also see down on the right hand side just the size of projects. So we size our projects based on risk and complexity and dollar spend, and the majority of them are in the kind of medium bracket. We have one extra large project, which is Memorial Park, and then a few larger ones, and then a few small ones as well. And then down the bottom, you can see just a summarised view of the delivery teams and where they're sitting and where they're forecasting where they're going to be at the end of the year. Once again, the teams can talk to that. And just also one of the most interesting ones in the middle, that's a number of projects we've got active. So we've got about 263 projects. A fair number of them are in the implement or construction stage. So that's the highest number we've ever had in terms of projects on the go. Also a considerable amount in the design stage as well. So if we rewound 3 or 4 years ago, you'd see more projects sitting in planning and design and implement. So just a lot of activity going on at the moment out there. And next slide. So from a procurement point of view, spend activity from May. A lot of work's gone through the panels. So there's panels in each of the main delivery teams that they use. The teams can probably speak to that when it comes to that if you've got any questions. I had a number of open procurements. Those open procurements have had a lot of responses, typically between 6 and 13 responses for each of those. Also, we have had a number of closed ones. The majority of them, 15 of them, are well within our procurement policy, less than 250k. There's 3 that are over that, but they've and we can provide the information for that. I think they're all in the transport space, and perhaps Nick can talk to that if there's any questions on that. That's activity from the last 3 or 4 months. Next slide. Yeah, so any questions on any of those slides, happy to ask them before handing over to community for their update.
Eric?
Thank you, James. Firstly, good effort with your November. I'm quite impressed. Now, just a question around the panels. Could you just briefly explain the panel process and what that adds, please?
Yeah, so we've got 4 panels, I think. One that sits in spaces and places, one that sits in transport, one that sits in waters. It's probably Nick's better to explain them because most of them are in an infrastructure space, and I guess the process that those went through and what they're delivering. You're happy, Nick?
Yeah, sure. So the panel scenario for procurement is where you have we're wanting to get out of the transactional arrangements of putting each and every project to the market every time we go out to procure something. So if I go through the waters as an example, for instance, we establish a 3 to 5 year forward works program that we engage with the sector on. We tell them what's coming up in both the professional services and the physical workspace. Then they get to submit a quality, a non-price attribute schedule that we then evaluate and rank them in order of basically quality that they can deliver. We then also there's a price component to it as well. So we have like a dummy schedule of rates that we evaluate as well. So they give us basically a schedule of rates for the cost of doing works. So we then evaluate that. So we know the quality that they can provide, we know the costs that they can provide, and then we select a number of them which are then on that panel. And then when we have works that are ready to go to the market, we go to that panel and select amongst those who will do the work for us. And it's based on pretty much an equal spread across that panel for a start. So if you're in, you will get some work, but then it doesn't mean that you will get work forever, because then as we go, as time goes on and we let new projects to the market, we have a quality component. So if you haven't performed to our expectations, then you get dropped on that list of suppliers. So there's sort of an incentive there for people to deliver to our requirements, time, cost, and quality, etc., that we apply a judgment on. And it's quite a common procurement method, both from in national government organisations like NZTA and ourselves, and that we don't take the market through a full tender process for each of the project, which is a cost to them, which ultimately we then pay for, of course. And also that the suppliers can then gear up for a pipeline of work that they know is coming their way. And that's probably the key to achieving value for money in a panel sort of scenario, in that there's not so much stopping and starting as it would be under a priced tender for every project. So there's a benefit that works both ways, both for the supply chain, professional services, physical work suppliers, and for us. And we've had it up and running for about 2 years now. Results are good.
Supplementary?
Yes, supplementary. So the title, that panel title, to me indicated the panel of decision makers in terms of awarding, but the panel in this context is actually basically the bidders. You have a panel of bidders. Yeah, so is that a commonly accepted label for that sort of procurement method?
Yeah, I think it is. I haven't heard of another name for it. We generally refer to it as a panel. Yeah, so it's not a panel of judges. No, it's a panel of suppliers, be it physical works or professional services.
Drysdale?
Hi, James. You kind of mentioned it in your presentation, but just wanted to confirm that the majority of those variances is due to the speed that they've been delivered rather than budget blowouts. Is that correct?
Yeah, so generally timing, but also scope. So as the program envelopes decreased, project teams are really looking at the scope of those projects and what they can do. So there's, out of those red projects at the moment, there's very few budget forecasting budget blowouts. They're primarily time and scope.
Mayor Schooler.
Thank you, Chair. So just going back to the panel and further to Rick's questions. So you suggested that if performance was lacking, panel lists would drop off. Can you suggest any drop-offs in the last 6 months, 6 to 12 months?
Not sure that we've had a drop-off. Well, we can leave that to the project delivery teams when they report on it, but I'm not familiar with anyone that's dropped off a panel because of poor performance.
Thank you. And just supplementary, so no, because I was also of the panel sounded a little bit like consultants. So there's no consulting or contracting fees paid for these panels?
No, we pay. We pay for the work done for each of those projects. It's not like there's a fee for them to sit on that panel. We did incur some costs. It's a very rigorous process setting up a panel, because when you've done that, you want to make sure that you have top suppliers that are giving you a good rate. So it was a very, very thorough process when they were set up. So there was obviously a cost involved with that. But as with any procurement, there's quite a lot of staff input and putting tender documents together, evaluations, etc. So setting it up is relatively costly, but then you don't go through procurement over and over and over again over the coming years. So there's gain in that.
So you're thinking by 2 years in, you're making better value for money in terms of procurement with these panels in place, with considering the setup costs?
Yeah, that's right. And absolutely. And what we do see, and we have historical data and comparisons that we can make. So, I mean, we wouldn't have established or actually signed off that procurement if the prices we had got in through the panel weren't competitive. So we do know that we're getting value for money.
Sorry, Councillor Currak, last one.
Couple actually, if you could indulge me. Now on page, what page am I looking at? 21, we have a table there with some contract values. So just to add some value to these tables for future meetings, because I assume this will be like a regular thing, could possibly, and there's plenty of room in terms of columns, and that table, for example, to include a bit more detail. And I'm thinking of, say, the first one, an open 18 million. If we can have 2 extra columns, or perhaps 3, with or 2 columns, yeah, basically with the adding the minimum average. So you look at all the lowest bids, total those, and you look at all the highest bids and total those, and have the percentage variance, like the average percentage variance between the lowest bid and the highest bid, just to tease out a bit of extra information from that. Then we can see trends. If when the markets tighten up, maybe you'll get a contraction between the level of between the lowest and highest bid, where when the market's busy, you know, a lot of companies just put a big number in there. You know, if they get it, it's fine. If they don't, and you know, I see some value in that. Would that be possible just to do that in that table, if that's supported by other members?
So Councillor Currak, can you just explain which table you're talking about? What page?
Page 21. So all we've got there is the actual awarded.
The bottom table, I think, 7.
The clause 7. So, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the bottom one, 7. Yeah, that table there to give a bit more detail around that. Get my drift. So of all those projects, the 4 in the top line I'm talking about, and same with the rest, there'd be, if you add the 4 lowest and the 4 highest and come up with a percentage variance. And a trend might have emerged over time, given that this be a regular update.
Nick, you want to comment?
Yeah, we can do that. We can look at a way that we try to make it insightful. Sometimes what we get in the tender box is actually not helpful in terms of understanding the total picture of what's going on. Sometimes we get tenders, people put in a tender that they know is way over, but there are time and time again supplier for us. They don't want to drop off. They don't want to show no interest in a project, so they put a tender in and hedge their bets on a very high price. They might not have necessarily the resources to do it. So if you were to go that way, you would pay a premium for it. So those numbers aren't actually necessarily all that helpful. We often get tenders in tender boxes with lots of tags. So you get a very low number, but they have tagged a lot of the contractual requirements, which means that before you sign them up, you have to go through and negotiate on all of those tags and understand what they actually are going to deliver within the contract. So I'm not quite sure of the value that you will actually gain from it, but we can see if there is something that we can report on in order to give you a valid picture of what's going on. So rather than just agreeing to it, maybe we come back with a process of how to do that so that you get some value from it.
Great, thank you, Nick. And members be aware there is a web page that lists all the tenders that have been awarded and the range and that, lowest, highest in the award, just for transparency. So there is a level of detail there available to the public and all the bidders anyway. The next question was around the construction cost indexes, and I see there GHD, I think the company that provides some put into the report. Firstly, my concern around GHD is they are a provider of services to councils, and how level of impartiality around a company offering advice around cost indexes, etc. But when you look at public works, which is where's the go-to place in terms of for an elected member, for example, to have a look at, say, an index over the last 10 years, if you want to compare cost movement, where would you recommend that we go to?
So we can provide
the best
thing. So traditionally, Burl, who are an economic agency, they provide all of local government with indices. They do that prior to, usually it's around October, prior to the development of annual plans and long-term plans. The information they provide is because it's across the whole sector. It doesn't have the nuance or the granularity that would apply to, say, our basket of projects that we're delivering, because it's taking into account territorial or regional authorities as well, and everybody's doing a slightly different mix. But that information is available. We can certainly provide the Burl reports. They've been going since I've been at council for 11 years, so I can go back and find all of those. That's easy enough. We've also, in terms of those cost indices provided by GHD, the indices that we use, it's all public information in terms of how they're built up, and it's found at the end of the attachment. So each of those materials or goods or labour or plant and machinery, that's got a series of calculations that I've worked with GHD on to develop. And then in terms of how it's allocated across each of those areas, whether it's road renewals or road infrastructure, we provided with GHD just with the high level percentage breakdown across the program. So they didn't see our wider LTP program, even though they could get access to it. We provided them with that guidance. And so all the historical stuff is actual data, of course. Going forward, that's more based on, I guess, GHD's interpretation of what's going to happen in the market, and that's based on a whole bunch of economic principles feeding into those indices, whether it's steel, bitumen, which we use oil because there's no bitumen market. All that thinking goes into what's going to forecast a position, and then also attached to that is just general conversations in the supply chain on what people expect to happen in their sector. So that all goes into the mix, and that's provided with an indice. I mean, we also compare what we get from GHD to what we get to Burl to sense check it as well. And generally those forecasts, there's always an element of crystal ball gazing. Nobody knows what's going to really happen in 5 or 10 years' time, but the law of averages evens it out and gives us a profile. And that's what we use for our assumptions in the LTP to drive the capital cost escalation going forward.
Thank you, James.
Sorry, Councillor Kirk, do you want to go further with the GHD thing? Or?
Well, my comment about lack of impartiality, my concern it's self-serving, given they're in the market and they perhaps, I don't want to suggest anything at all, and so I prefer not to dig deeper on that. But regarding the indice or the cost construction index, the question was triggered by the aquatic facility, thinking, well, if you looked at other aquatic facilities delivered over the recent years or up to 10 years ago, and where I would go as the one-stop shop in terms of offering, you know, accurate data around the construction cost index of, for example, a facility like that. But that might be a bit, you know, too hopeful in terms of that level of detail. But yeah, so where would a city council or a member of the public go if they wanted to get a reasonable handle on how much an aquatic centre would have cost, and the cost increased over the last 10 years, for example, just to give an indicative estimate. Where's the place that we could go?
Good question. There's certainly indices available on Stats NZ that show the construction sector and building prices. They're probably not easy to find on the website. It could be buried in there. There are other providers of construction information. I don't think it's publicly available. They're all commercial products that you have to subscribe to. So probably the best place would be Stats NZ. I can certainly have a look and maybe share some insights back with elected members.
That would be great. Thank you, James, because I did go to Stats NZ and went through InfoShare where you've got various, you know, categories, etc. But I found it difficult and actually surprising to the level or the seemingly low level of inflation over a given period. But perhaps I was using it wrong. But some advice around that would be great. Thank you, James.
Councillor Gurrick, thank you. Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, I agree with, I went to Stats NZ, had the same thing. It didn't look like there'd be much inflation at all in this local government sector, but I keep hearing there is. My question is the thing on page 25, on the bottom left where it's got the project delivery group with the colour code, the red, amber, green. I presume it's just not quite laid out as intended, because I presume the major transport one is the one that has the biggest red bar. Please correct me if that's not right. I'm just trying to get my head around the usefulness of this, because we heard at a transport committee that pretty much everything is on track with transport. You know, give or take the known issue around Cameron Road Stage 2 and connecting Mount Wanganui. But we have 20-something%. I presume this is the number of projects. That's another question, I guess. Is this the number of projects as opposed to the cost? Yep. So looks like 20-something% are in the red. And then I'm thinking, you know, how are we meant to react to that? Because when I sort of go, right, we've got 20-something% of our transport projects in the red. So then does that mean we need to hone in really closely and start digging in and seeing a bit of this? If I hadn't been on a transport committee, I might have thought that. But then from the transport team and the committee, it sounded like everything's pretty much okay. So I'm just trying to understand, you know, like, what is this red really telling us? Like, how serious is the red? Does there need to be a sort of a, you know, a bright scarlet or something that's added to the colour coding to show us when we need to be starting to get a bit concerned about something?
Yeah, it's a good
Maybe
question.
we can get to that when we get to the project reporting as well. But obviously, there is a lot of red in the transport space reporting because of the NRTP and the funding that's come through or not come through, as the case may be. So there are a lot of projects in there which we had planned on delivering. Now they're not being delivered because of that funding status, and that immediately trips them into the red category. So that has upped the volume of red a lot. So I guess in the Transport Committee, we're probably more reporting on what we are delivering at the moment and what our plan is, for instance, for the major projects that we're looking at taking through business cases, etc. So there's a time component, a cost component, and a quality component that can drop it into the red category. And like James said at the start of the meeting, it's probably more the time and the time component at the moment generally across the board. We have some overspends as well, but predominantly in the transport space, by numbers, it's because we can't deliver them that they're in the red. Yeah.
Follow up through the chair. Maybe the idea is if something in any of these categories needs to jump out at us, just make sure it does. It's probably the suggestion, because I sort of look at it and think, hopefully this means it's okay in waters and all the other areas of red. Yep.
Just through the chair, what we can do, and maybe we can do this with councillors Carrack and Taylor, is provide the parameters of what a red project actually is, so elected members have that, and then maybe can query the parameters in terms of what they'd like to see as red. That's something we can do. We can also provide at the next committee meeting the full list of all red projects and why they're red and what mitigations are being carried out to return them to green.
Thank you, James. It's much appreciated.
Councillor Correct, the last one.
What a privilege. Page 26. I've sort of added up the figures in that list, headed procurement summary, and totaled 38 million. So where's the rest? No. You just add up those figures, I thought it'd be a lot more. $26.
What page is that? Sorry, I'm having difficulty looking. Is it on the slide deck?
I believe he's talking about the procurement summary, May 24, October 24, is that correct?
Of the agenda, page 26.
Yep. So that's just the actual procurement activity. There's obviously a lot more projects in progress, but that procurement activity would have occurred. So that's the activity, I guess, where either tenders have gone out and then been awarded during those 4 months. There's a lot of
it doesn't seem much, given the size of what we're heading into.
It's only capital projects, so it won't include any operational ones.
So just in terms of the procurement and the panels, I don't recall the procedure, the procurement policy sets out this process. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Thanks. I'll go back to that. Thank you.
I'd just like to move on. So I think, James, if you'd like to carry on with your presentation, or is someone else taking over?
I can pass it on to, I think, Amanda is next on the community. Go back to the slide deck and the community facilities.
Thank you. Morning, Amanda.
Morning. Update on the progress of projects in the community infrastructure space. So just some highlights since we last caught up. We've been progressing really well with our sports field upgrade program. So that's upgrades at Pemberton, Blake Park and Gordon Spratt Park. The season's gone really well and those upgrades have proceeded really well. We've made good progress now on the Otamutai Matua walkway and we're hoping to have that open at Christmas. We've just finished a whole lot of renewals in Johnson Reserve on the boardwalks and the structures through there as well. And we had the blessing this month and well underway with earthworks at Mirabelle Community Centre. And this week we'll be moving into the actual property build or the build portion of that particular progress. And we're well on track to get Waitaha Reserve upgrade completed with a community celebration there on the 14th of December to open that reserve. Next slide. Next slide. Yep. We're also, back one. There we go. We're also well on track on the completion of the pavilion at Alice Johnson Reserve in Papamoa, with a opening for that in early December as well. We've started work on the Papamoa shared path, so that all got underway this month, and we've just completed some enhancements at the skate park, which was based on user feedback. So we had a little bit of feedback that they wanted better access from the Blake Park Reserve car park to the intersection and the safe crossing at Hull Road. We needed some more spaces for the parents to be able to sit and be out of the way of the kids racing past on their scooters and their skateboards. So we've created a few little areas for that. And we also had some feedback that they would have, users would have liked some additional lighting was required down by the toilet block around safety. So we put some additional lighting in as well. So it's just the project financials at the moment, just highlighting that Bay Park, of course, is on hold at the moment, but progressing really well. There's nothing really to call out in terms of the financials at the moment. So in terms of how the projects are progressing at the moment, these were the RAG statuses that James was just talking about previously. So Maryvale's going really well at the moment. We're on track to have that open in August, with construction moving into the building work this week on site. Gate Park Community Centre, we're working towards being on site and starting that construction work in February. So the construction team's well on track to do that. Complex 2 at the Historic Village, work is still proceeding really well there, and we're on track to have that facility opened at the end of February. And Links Ave, we're just going through all the pre-construction phases of that project at the moment, and the contractor will be establishing on site there on the 7th of January. And of course then the Bay Park Netball Centre, which is currently on hold. I guess that's an example of one of the red projects that's currently sitting in our program because it's on hold. Next slide. Some of the challenges at the moment, we've had a couple of projects previously that were affected by the changes in the NZTA funding, so we've resolved those, but probably just highlighting that some of those projects that are on hold did have other external funding that was associated with them from organisations like TEC. So that's all, of course, that funding's at risk at the moment, depending on how those projects progress. And the same with some of the pipeline of work. We've got around our panels and some of that work, it's all about the pipeline and been having confidence of those projects coming to market. So once we've been through the annual plan process, it would be good to be able to confirm those projects with the marketplace in terms of moving forward. That was everything from me.
Questions for Amanda?
Yeah, thank you. Question around netball. Can we just get really clear in terms of the dollars relating to the netball component of that Bay Park master plan? I understand that there were meetings with councillors, some councillors and netball, and I understand council has been engaging with netball, and I understand there's probably other conversations happening, but I thought I'd heard that it was a significantly lower number, and then I sort of see here 36.1 million, and then total estimate now is 47.4, 11.3 variance to budget. Is that for netball? If not, how much is the netball component, and what is the rest of it for?
So that's not exclusively for netball. A large proportion of that is for netball, but there were some other works relating to Speedway that were also part of that project budget.
Could we have the amounts, like for each? Do you know a rough?
I'd have to go
Okay.
and double check. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pardon? Yeah, it was car parking and some work around Speedway. Yeah.
Further questions? Thank you, Amanda. That's the end of the presentation.
That's Walter's now.
Oh, no, sorry. Morning, Wally.
Morena tato, Chair and councillors. Yeah, that's City Waters highlights, thank you. So we've got a couple of photos up there. One of them is to do with flood mitigation, the one top left, Opal Drive. Oh, sorry, the Beaumaris Boulevard stormwater project, that's flood mitigation. And the other projects shown are all related to growth. The stormwater project, obviously the clarifiers at the treatment plant, Wairaki pump station, and the Opal Drive pump station to service Eastern Papamoa. And you can see clarifier 3 there under construction, top right, and then bottom right, it's undergoing its water test, so it's full of water. Next slide, thank you. Councillors came and had a look at Opal Drive pump station. So that was good to see. Yep, boots on the ground, always good to have. We do wastewater relining projects throughout the city on a rolling basis. Where they're needed to ensure that we have watertight pipes. And there's a program doing at the Mount Maunganui CBD area, and we've broken that up. So it's through November through to December, then we're clearing out of there, and we're coming back at the very end of March, I think around Easter time, to undertake the rest. We didn't want to be closing down some of that commercial area or having road closures or road cones out during that busy time of the year. So that project, usually they run continually, but for this area, obviously we want to be a bit more customer focused or community focused. Thank you. Next slide. And the program, there's not a lot to say in there. There's some unders and some overs. We're a little bit late starting this financial year, and that's why we're going to be a little bit underspent this year. And obviously that was until we had our budgets confirmed. And Nick was talking earlier about the panels. Our panels are going well and up and running, but we were a little bit late getting some of that panel work into the panels to get it underway until we actually knew what budgets we were kind of dealing with. So there has been a bit of a minor delay of a month or two getting that work out to the market. Next slide. Key projects. It's pretty self-explanatory. I guess the one that would take the most interest is the one with the 2 red lights, and that's the Tamanga program. So the Tamanga program has actually been very successful. We've put in a large effluent pipeline, cleaned out the ponds, we've put in a thickening and dewatering facility, which is a full plant in its own right. We've upgraded the landward section of the outfall. We've built a new UV plant. So there's a combination there of growth and levels of service projects. But the one that's, of course, is consuming our attention at the moment is Bioreactor 2. And we have got a remedial design underway, and that's progressing quite well at the moment. I think that's all for that slide. And current and future challenges. Obviously, we're a little bit distracted around the local water done well. We're not distracted. It's a core piece of work at the moment for us. And we're continually getting little insights and DIA updates. So that's keeping us very interested and close to what's happening. There's a bit of pressure on budgets, and obviously we've been pushing out quite a lot of work from this year and the 26th year as well. So there will be a bit of a bow wave that we'll have to deal with in subsequent financial years. And obviously the external funding, we've had to realign our program very closely with the transport program. A lot of it's initiated through what's happening with some of the major projects with the transport teams. And that's about it, I guess. Happy to take any questions.
Mayor Drysdale.
Yeah, just interested on this pipe relining. Is that effectively putting new pipes in the old pipes? Is that what you mean by relining, or?
Essentially, yes. So you saw there's a bit around Monganui Road and Grace, and then there's the shade lanes and steel lane. So some of those commercial lanes that they've got the sewer pipes through there. So during low flows, which is nighttime, we typically pull through a spiral wound pipe and then let it expand, and it expands up and locks into the pipe. So the bore of the pipe becomes slightly smaller. It doesn't lose a lot of capacity, but it makes it watertight. So some of those old pipes, while they're structurally sound, may have leaks in the joints. Some of those joints are a bit old and the rubber over time wears. So we reline some of these pipes.
Further questions? Thank you, Ollie. Good report.
Thank you.
Now I have the transport guys. Morning, gents.
Kia ora, councillors, and through you, Mr. Chair. Cam and I will present the information for today. I just wanted to perhaps just roll back to that procurement conversation a little bit earlier. And just to note from a transport perspective, our partners, Waka Kotahi, really define the kind of structures and procurement processes that we all need to use. And in fact, their procurement approaches override councils where their money is involved. So for example, maintenance and renewals and the improvement projects where we secure Waka Kotahi funding, the central government procurement strategy is the one that we have to follow in order to access those dollars. So we're very much in step with their procurement approaches and whatnot. And indeed, panels and other things like that are a process and a way of procuring services that are well known to the agency and well used at different times for different purposes. But the right tool for the job, I think, is the key component with regard to choosing procurement approaches. And in transport, we have our version of that. But again, it's something that we have to work up with a kind of fairly robust process with our partners to make sure that we're doing things the right way and we provide value for money for not just ratepayers, but for taxpayers as well. And so we are locked in step. I think that was just the key point to make, and we'll jump into the presentation.
Through you, Chair. Good morning, all. As you can see on the screen there and in the reports, we have some highlights of our projects. Generally, a lot of these are wrapping up at the moment, have been delivered through the last financial year. First, Arataki Bus Hub upgrade. Shelters are set to be installed. All the paving works are put through. The realignment of the roads and the roading have been put through there. That is a concept drawing at the bottom, but it's actually starting to look a heck of a lot like that with the opening proposed this week. We're looking to arrange a blessing and stuff this week before we commence actually opening the facility. Next slide, please. Monganui Road safety improvements. Been a long haul on this one, but this is stage 3, is now looking to close out. We were set for completion at the end of October. There was a couple of delays that we had some downtime weeks to accommodate AIMS games. Contractors responded very well to that though, and we've worked in with our network operations team to trial some new steel fort roading improvement materials that helps us with the line marking and the duration and life expectancy of that line marking. So we've dovetailed that in nicely. Obviously, the pictures look a little confused from this view, but when you're on the ground there, it actually gives you a great way to flow through that site and past the shops there in a more safe fashion, especially for cyclists and those in the shared path. You can see the improvements there when it comes to intersections and crossings as well. Next slide, please. Welcome Bay and Waitaha roundabout is now completed and opened. The resurfacing has been undertaken, reline marking through there. We've had some really positive feedback from the community in terms of access to open spaces and movement around there, especially from some of our vulnerable populations who've found that really challenging to negotiate in the past. And that's what we do this for, is to help get those people moving around their community a lot better. So we're happy with that. Some challenges with the contractor, we've resolved those in terms of the road materials are now certifiable, and we're happy to keep those and put those into our asset network. Next slide, please. Same contractor, same issue overcome with the same sort of good result, that we now have movement through here on Ocean Beach Road, Girvan Maranui intersection improvements. I'm sure if you've driven through there, you'll appreciate the flow is vastly better than it was prior to these improvements. The rat running through the back of Arataki and past the shops there has all but ceased. Allows us much safer for residents moving up towards the beach and through to that shop area and stuff as well. We're quite happy with the line marking where it turned out here. Again, the asset has been certified as appropriate to add to our network. Next slide, please. Numbers. As we all know, we are the ones that probably got hit a little hard when it came to numbers here. And you can see that the numbers as they've dropped down from what we delivered, the actuals of 24 to the actuals we're proposing for 25. There's some large drops there in terms of our safety and low cost risk programs. But we're adapting to those. And obviously, as the refocus comes on, we have to be adaptable to that. It happens every 3 years or 6 years, depending on when we go with cycles. And that's, I hate the saying, but it is what it is. So we're just learning to roll with that. The reforecast budgets have been put in there. We've been working very closely with our major project brethren to allocate any surplus funds or uncommitted funds pragmatically across both programs. Where rather than holding large budgets or contingencies for major projects, we've been redistributing those back into prioritising some of the smaller works.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, it's fair to say that the process that we're heading towards with regard to the annual plan, these numbers will settle down. There are some numbers in here that look like the future, or the future as it was versus the future as it is now. And so you'll start to see them roll through, particularly with the total project estimates and the budget and the LTP columns. Those things will change once we get more confirmation of financial year 26 and through the annual plan. So those will we work through. So the key columns to look at, particularly around project performance and a bit of a nod to what does red mean in terms of the reforecast budget in the financial year 25 and the forecast. Those are the two columns that are really relevant is around what is our progress to program, what are we delivering on, and are we meeting the required burn rates and whatnot with regard to those numbers. So the team is very much focused on making sure that with the revised view of what we can deliver, particularly from the Waka-Kotahi funding, that we've cut our cloth to fit, I think is the key part there.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Chair, just continuing on to the next slide, please. For our current projects, the big red we have there from Tarakura Drive is NZTA has expressed some reservations in terms of their application of PT versus roads of national significance. Whilst they're working that internally, they have given us an in-principle approval to proceed to use the funding that was previously for an off-road PT hub to investigate the design of an on-road solution. We've undertaken multi-criteria assessment again that looked at the scope of that. And as discussed at the joint regional PT committee, that the support was there for an on-road hub option to be progressed as well concurrently. Whilst we're on time at the moment for our baseline, we're looking at some inventive technologies to try and progress that and give us a better roading base for that area and reduce costs to sort of match the on-road facility. Whilst NZTA is not funding that at this point in time, we will be coming back to council at some days to seek a resolution on whether we proceed with that on-road facility and just march on regardless and prioritise PTA hub with the funding that we have. Costs are within ballpark again, but it needs to be clarified in terms of what we do with the funding that we do have. Tarakura Drive obviously is looking to go into our request for tender very soon. And we would intend to go out to market for request for tender to do an on-road solution at this point in time. We have timeframes, as you know, an agreement with TCL to meet certain timeframes to provide that asset. And we intend to meet the intent of that agreement. Okay, transportation improvements. As you see, some of those are orange, or they look very yellow up there, but they are definitely orange, amber. So those are a lot of those projects that have been troublesome, I guess, in terms of, say, our Levers Road crossing removal. We've come back and completed that. We did have some media coverage, but generally it was a fairly balanced commentary. I praise the folks in the media that they didn't crucify us too much on that one. They understood the troubles that we were in, and we have dealt with that fairly appropriately, I guess. But one thing we are looking for those transport improvements, and I'll mention it again in the next thing, the challenges, is actually looking to get some of our in-house design capabilities, looking at some of our major projects to try and address these things in the future going forward. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the Arataki Bus Exchange, it says October there. We are a couple of weeks late. That was slightly reforecast due to the power line issues. But that was a good result for us, and it's looking very good on the ground. Arterial route review, we do have some orange in here for scope and cost simply because of its complexity and its support requirement for Turret and 15th. We're not sure how that dovetails completely at the moment until we get full clarity from NZTA. But that is, we have undertaken a sort of surveying and route and existence definition works. We're really looking to get stuck into that once we have some clarity on the major projects front. Monganui Road safety improvements. We do have 2 red flags there, but that's simply because we came right to the edge of budget. We negotiated through with our network and maintenance ops to get some road resurfacing done through that program. So that was a bring forward of part of their program to help reduce our costs. So that did keep us within budget, although right to the point of the budget. And we can't claim a win on that because we did have help from network ops. But we were a month or so late from our baseline program, but now completed in 2024, November. I think that's the last one of those slides. One more? Yes, this one. So obviously we've had some budget cap reduction. As I mentioned before, that is just the world we're in at the moment. We have taken steps, as previously noted by council, to reduce our contractor PM resources and bring our capability back in-house. We're also looking to the increased focus of the budget cap reduction has been a lot of major project work coming through. We're starting to adjust our ways of working to utilise our funding more efficiently. So this brings project activities back in-house. So PMs, we're going to get them back to boots on ground. So they'll be getting more involved with the consultation activities, increasing the presence of TCC staff actually when it comes to consultation with the community. Going back to the coalface a little bit. So we're also trying to investigate our capability and capacity within-house when it comes to design, reviewing some of our resource consents, that type of thing. So just making ourselves a bit more of a value add proposition. Government reporting. We are meeting through on that. Marty may mention this with the Transport Network Ops, but we've actually got a project running concurrently with one of our project team, working with the Network Ops, looking at the traffic management plans. So central government has asked us to come back and request or report on costs for those. And we're undertaking now as a project forming up to look at how we deliver that across the municipality and how we reduce those costs and how we support our contractors in coming up with innovative approaches.
There's another slide. Me dries out.
Thank you. Firstly, yeah, well done on looking at everything to try to reduce costs. It's you're listening to the direction, so we appreciate that. I just had a question. It's around the two parts. The Arataki bus interchange. This is significantly under budget. Is that around sort of scope, and then that sort of leads into the Tarakura drive upgrade. I'm just keen to understand that because it seems to be, hugely higher than the Arataki bus interchange, and just keen to understand that.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. So the Arataki bus interchange, that was for the main format and structure of putting in the shelters and the groundwork and stuff there. We do have that what we call a second stage of that, which would be our streetscaping. So that would be the replenishment of the gardens behind those shelters, softening of the street frontage and stuff to the shopping centre, and actually preserving that to make it a bit more attractive space rather than the hard edge car park, ratty garden and shelter that we have at the moment. We found that that's not really encouraging appropriate social behaviour. So we're trying to open that space up and get some permeability for pedestrians through that space. So that would go into we just waited till the budget settled down and we got our proper forecast as to see how much money we could keep with this budget. But they want to move into a design phase in that with our places and spaces teams to actually get back some assets to treat that streetscape a little better. So that's the remainder of the budget. We'll look into that part there.
And through you, Mr. Chair, through the annual plan process, our out years in terms of costs that we're forecasting are still not confirmed. So that means we have to consider scope. So what we've tried to do through the process of the annual plan is make sure that the scope that we're delivering is lasting. And the things that we might determine in a later course of action as nice to have, we're able to put that in or not. But there are some decisions that are coming up on the 4th of December that will materially affect some of these forecasts. So we're looking forward to a little bit of certainty in that space so that we can nail down the program. So in terms of the whole program certainty, there is still quite a bit of uncertainty and risk in the program that we are trying to manage, and we're doing it on a project by project basis. And I think this is one of those, and particularly how the numbers sometimes don't seem to stack up is because we're moving and shuffling costs through time so that we can fit within the right kind of envelopes and whatnot. So we're doing it on the hoof a little at times, but at this stage, we've got to make sure that the key components of that projects are delivered and the contracts are delivered. That scope is delivered through the contracts we have.
then just the Tarakura Drive.
Thank you through you, Chair. Tarakura Drive is actually rolled up under NZTA funding, has now been put into the larger packet of the Tariko West Enabling Works. So we have a line item that goes through and there has been reapportioned. I'm not a massive fan of the way NZTA have priced this out in terms of contingency upon contingency. So that's what's giving you that larger cost at the end of that. We think the cost to deliver is probably closer to 20 million than 30. And that is the contingency works. Obviously, that's partially NZTA funding, partially ours, and maybe distributed across the broader scope of the Tariko West Enabling Works. So at the moment, that's where we're tightening up our end of the scope to see if we can reduce the cost for Tariko Drive as much as we can. That also includes a forecast figure for the provision of a PT hub, which we did not get funding for. So they've included that as a contingency amount, but we can't use it to build a hub. So
And through you, Mr. Chair, as a matter of program discipline, we need to keep that contingency and allowance for that until we have certainty around the decision. The decision that Wapokotei will be taking to the board or VOS committee will be in December and a component in next year. So the more certainty we get out of our partners around the funding amount we have here, we'll change that number. So early in the new year, we'll have a more accurate level of estimation here with some of that risk and uncertainty watered out of that price. But at the moment, we have to hold it there to be true until we know that those decisions are real.
Or in the PT hub part of that 30 million, is that, do we have any sort of range or?
So through you, Chair, yes, it was 4 to 6 to build with an extra contingency of 4. Yeah.
Councillor Crowther.
I had two questions. First one is just following up on the Mayor's comments. I'm still unclear why FY25 is up 4.4. I understand the big picture with the contingency and the changes, but why for this year did it go up such a huge percent compared to what was planned?
You, Mr. Chair, just a clarification, you mean Arataki bus interchange?
Tarakura Drive upgrade.
My apologies, Councillor, through you, Chair. I'm not sure what number you're referring to there.
Sorry, on the page 42, where the budget was 1.3 in the reforecast budget, and then the forecast now is 5.7 million.
That was the bring forward that we had to come through from the final year because we were going to go into construction. So the original forecast was for us to be not in construction at that period, but only in design. That didn't allow for the agreement that we have with TCL to be commencing construction.
You did, through the chair, you didn't know that you had to be in construction until this financial year.
No, through the chair, so we knew we had to be in construction, but during the prioritisation process, this is one of the misses that was not prioritised early enough. Yeah.
The other question was just in terms of this column for the total project budget per 2434 LTP, is that a running total based on, for instance, the last workshop we had or the last council meeting? Like, I'm just trying to figure out what that, I know you made the valid point, Mike, that that's going to change and that could well, go upwards significantly if we get more funding in the next NLTP, I presume. But is this looks to me like it's a lot lower. So is that the current running total based on our quite constrained balance sheet scenario?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is in between, unfortunately. So there is a series of assumptions in here based on the original LTP numbers and then the reforecast LTP numbers. And they are cognizant of the work that's being underway in financial year 26, but I wouldn't hold them to be accurate until those decisions are made. So there are some things like a particular project, Tarakura Drive, which is, we've got more confidence in that number, that's the total cost of the project minus contingencies, so on and so forth. But when you're looking at a safety program like low cost, low risk, or the renewals and whatnot, there's a lot more uncertainty around how that spend might take place, particularly through the next NLTP process. So some of the numbers you can rely on more, particularly if they're a project-related cost. But if they're a program level, then they will pick up the long-term cost in the LTP and they'll be less accurate. as part of this list.
Questions on transport, anyone? No? Tapu?
Morena Korua. Yeah, great work on Waitaha, as well as everything else, but really choice to see the impact that that's had on the community. Just wanting to know, you mentioned the main contractor made the same mistake twice at 2 different projects. What are the exact kind of mechanisms we're putting in place to ensure that they're delivering on time, on budget, all those sorts of things?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I might go first and Cam can give a bit more of the detail. I think just to step back from that, it's can be a little bit ugly when you're delivering a project and things don't go perfectly. And it's exactly right to say that if we see a trend in performance, that's what we have to address. So after that project, we're doing a lessons learned around what was the mechanistic problem or miscommunication or some such that that was present in both projects, and then what's the fix. Fulton Hogan themselves have also recognised that there's something that has to improve, and so they are definitely working with us around that, and we're going to improve our process. So some of it is around when you design a pavement, it's a bit like MasterChef. You have to get the recipe right, and particularly for that location. And so there's quite a lot of back and forth around what the right recipe is. And so that can lead to sometimes ambiguity or greyness. And I think in this circumstance, we probably take a little bit of the heat around, did we go far enough and push hard enough? So there's lessons for us to learn in this. And then also where our contractors receptive to that feedback and whatnot. And it comes down to things like that sometimes around this. But I know for one thing is our supply chain is very attentive, and they're looking to make sure that they keep improving on this. So we've got some processes underway now to improve how we do it.
It'd be really good if that, even if it's in confidential, that's all right, that lessons learned comprehensive kōrero actually comes back, at least comes back to me, if not to the wider table. Yeah, just because some of the things that you touched on, probably, yeah, it just doesn't quite make sense how we don't have that much flex, considering how much expertise we have in-house, how experienced they are. But some of just at a practical level with Waitaha, that bottom, so we're on page, if anyone wants to have a look, page 40, that bottom crossing, before it was put in, on the right-hand side of the road, there was a normal lamp, night lamp, whatever, so that's not what they're called, street light. And then when you put when we put the crossing in, which requires an additional lamp, they had to put them both up because the contractors on the ground doing the work didn't have the flex to be able to make the adjustment on the fly, and all of that just has continued cost and burden and hoha for community, you know. And so whether that's an us problem or a Fulton Hogan, doesn't matter what it does, but actually it'll be really good to see what lessons we have learnt and how we're going to address some of these things moving forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think hoha is the right word with some of this, and we feel it too. For my part, I'd be happy to do that. I think in a private forum enables staff to talk about it fairly candidly around our own responsibilities in this conversation, and to be able to describe the situation with detail. So more than happy to produce that.
Thank you. No rush on that, but just at some point.
And thank you through you, Chair. And just to sort of cap that off, we are taking the lessons learned very seriously in terms of investigating our capability to actually take more ownership of that design process, which is a very big part. We find we've divested a bit of our design responsibility during the commissioner rush period, get money out the door. Now we're taking more of that responsibility back in-house. But yeah, happy to share those lessons learned.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Good question. Further questions? Thank you, Transport team. Emily, I think you're next.
Just check with you, James. You want me to cover this off, but in the absence
I'm happy,
of you, I will.
for you to cover that off. Yeah.
Great. So the city centre program and city centre transport has been moved into the balance of the program. So there's a little less detail than we provided last time. I also got a little bit trigger happy and reported to November, just because we very rapidly moved through settlement of 134 Durham and close out for Red Square. So just taking us back into October. We were anticipating the settlement of 134 Durham Street, beginning of November, and we are bringing you the laneway options today. Red Square was anticipating the final works, which was the moving into place of the relocatable play pod and the sculpture installation. We've now moved that into closeout. And then in terms of the city centre Durham Street bus hub, we had a tender out for the fabrication of shelters and anticipating the tender out for construction. So those are probably the big rocks in our city centre program. Next slide shows some numbers. So again, this is reporting at October, but we've moved through settlement, as I said, and we'll be closing out Red Square and 79 Grey Street. Happy to take any questions.
Baker.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Atamari. Just on the really cool art install on Red Square, which is super cool. Why didn't we procure locally for that?
Through you, Chair. Great question. So about 18 months ago, a new public art trust was set up, and that's Font. So they were set up to commission and install public art in the city centre specifically. So this wasn't a TCC commission. This was a Font commission, and they went through their commissioning decision processes to choose the particular artist and work through the agreements with Longveld. In terms of the choice for fabrication of the sculpture itself, it's a very niche, from what I understand, a very niche market, and translating an artist's sketch into a thing that can withstand wind, that can stand up, that doesn't have climbability, those types of things, is very small, and Longveld are really well regarded in this space, based over in Hamilton.
So do we, sorry, supplementary question. So with Font, do we have any influence over some of their policies? Like, do we fund them, or are they entirely independent and just given license to art up our city?
Sure. So we did provide them a grant. It was a matched grant between TECT and TCC for the commissioning of their first artwork. We don't hold any control over the decisions that they make. However, their, I guess, intentions are very much aligned with council's intentions for world-class public art in our city centre.
Cool. Cool as well. Then just for the record, if they're listening, we've got world-class artists in Tauranga who can produce world-class art. Let's invest locally and get the same amount of value, if not greater, with place-based artists.
So school art.
Councillor Baker, because those two things didn't resonate. I think you said their strategy or their policies are very aligned with TCC's, but I would have thought TCC's were very much in Councillor Baker's camp, that we would support much rather support local artists and suppliers than say world-class doesn't come from here. So world-class local art is, I hope, what TCC is supporting to the city centre. That local didn't seem to be part of what you talked about.
I absolutely agree. I don't think those two things are not the same thing. I think we can absolutely have world-class art from artists in Tauranga. Again, we just weren't holding the pen on the choice of artists in this case, but I will hand over to Barbara to talk about the public art framework, which a artwork today would then go through this process, through the public art framework, through the panel approach.
Through you, Chair. Yes, certainly that the piece of artwork that we are talking about was a one-off that was supported by the council. From this year on, we've actually got a budget in our CapEx budget that talks about working towards 1% for art. And so we'll call for expressions of any interest, and any application would go through the criteria that we've set up for the public art framework. It'll go through a panel fairly similar to what you've just talked about for CapEx projects, and I'm happy to report in a future meeting just to provide you the detail of that and how it will work from here on in. There's quite a lot of detail, so I'm just conscious of the time you've got at this meeting, but very happy to provide that detail to you.
Thank you. I'd definitely like to see, and can you confirm that in the principles it talks about local?
Oh, look, I'd have to get that out. No, I'll have to check that.
And I just think I would like for the record to say that from my perspective, ratepayers and Tauranga will feel much more value for money if we are supporting other ratepayers and Tauranga in terms of our public art.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cool.
Further questions? Councillor Crowther?
Thank you. Yeah, two questions around the cost increases on the digital program and Te Manawa-Taki or Te Papa. And on that latter one, I'm just trying to understand what the total project budget, like what that actually refers to, because it's obviously a lot more than the normal budget. So it includes other components of that. And I'm just wondering which components have actually led to the increase in cost.
Thank you, James. That's going to have to be a you question.
Yep. So in terms of the digital, I understand there's a digital paper coming to council. It'll go through the budget and I guess the challenges in that space. I'm not sure the timing of that, but I know it is coming. In terms of the Te Manawa-Taki.
Can you just repeat that again, please? We didn't hear that first part. Can you just repeat that?
I understand there's a paper coming to council on the digital program that will probably go into it a bit more detail. I can't comment exactly on the individual components of that program that's showing that variance, fortunately. In terms of the Te Manawa-Taki or Te Papa program, that includes the base 300. I'm guessing, I'm not actually quite sure because I don't have the numbers on me. The remainder of that program is actually I'm not sure what makes up the balance of that. I'm not gonna guess.
Through the chair, if I could just ask, could we get details around what the difference between the 110 and the 125.8 is, and also what the 541 total comprises? Because I presume it's the waterfront maybe as well, but
no,
even
I can answer
what else would we be?
So I can answer that question in terms of this year. So that'll be related to just the timing of the CWM and the library in terms of the latest cash flow forecast coming out of Willis Bond. So that's what driving that variance. There's no change to the overall projects, but just a timing in terms of how they're going with the construction.
Does that mean they're proceeding faster than expected?
They're forecasting that they can proceed faster than expected.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Yeah, given that you're looking around seeking questions, just clarity on the digital program, and I heard a report is coming to the council. Why is there a report coming? Is there a new initiative or some expansion on it?
Through the chair, no, we have a forecast program to deliver on our digital program. Unfortunately, as part of the long-term plan process, a number of those initiatives weren't funded. And so we're coming back to check in and discuss with council as to whether or not they should proceed or not. Obviously, there's some financial implications there, not just for digital, but for the wider program. So we thought it needed to be part of a wider conversation.
Councillor Crowther.
That's prompted another question then, Marty. So this is stuff that was, my understanding is these columns are what was in the LTP. So this is a cost escalation on what was in there. But is that because you brought stuff in and then are wanting to sort of retrospectively see if that meets our approval? Or is it that there is cost escalation on what's in there and you're also looking to bring in some other stuff?
Through the chair, specifically in digital, I wouldn't say it's cost escalation. Essentially, they're programs of works that are unfunded at this stage, and we need to check back in to see whether or not we proceed with these or not.
My understanding was the FY25s are all they're all in the LTP, but are you saying there are certain things that are not in the LTP that are in the FY25 reforecast budget and actuals and those other columns?
Well, we think that the decisions that are yet to be made as part of both this year's costs and also next year's annual plan costs as well. So
it's just bewildering to me because I would have thought anything at the moment, what we're under the impression, well, I'm under the impression from the workshops we've had that we are taking projects out of FY26, that we are either holding or taking projects out of FY25, that's all fine, no problem at all there. But to actually I didn't think we were bringing things in from outside the LTP without an explicit instruction from the council.
Yeah, and that's specifically the purpose for us actually bringing this report to council. So
I guess I'd just say that I want reassurance there's nothing else in here that is actually in the actuals column or the reforecast budget that is not in the LTP. Is the only thing in that category the digital program, or are Te Manawataki, City Centre, Transport, all those other things, are they also not in the LTP to some extent and being brought into this year's budget?
Well, I think the only ones that need that type of conversation relate to digital. The other ones, in my view, are clearly in the long-term plan and have been budgeted for. Like I say, there's a number of digital programs that we need to report back to see whether or not we proceed with or not. And I think as opposed to, I basically it's a decision that council will need to make to understand the consequences of proceeding or not proceeding. So,
thank you for clarifying. I think through the chair, I'd like to suggest that we have another column in this for future times, so that we have a column that's explicitly for things that were not in the LTP that are brought in, because I think it helps us understand where all this is coming from, because it did look like a significant cost escalation. So it would be both to the advantage of the organisation to reassure us that the costs are not blowing out, but it would also provide clarity of where the higher cost is coming from. Yeah.
Thank you, and that raises a question to me. We are, I think, just receiving this report. Marty, I thought you said the reason for this report is that you are putting things that weren't in the long-term plan in this so we can see them, but there's no approval process in terms of this report. Is that correct? This is not approving anything that we haven't had specific approval on.
no, we're not seeking any approvals today for anything. What we're proposing to do is bring a report back. I think it might be part of the workshop on the 4th and then the subsequent annual plan discussion on the 9th as to whether or not we proceed with programs that have started, that we've stalled in some cases, and we need to check in whether we proceed with those or not. So just as a matter of context, we had a report come to the executive about 6 weeks ago about these digital programs. We felt that they were decisions that council needed to make as opposed to the executive, because I think there are quite wide ramifications of either proceeding or not proceeding. We needed to check in. So,
thank you for that explanation, Marty. I think we do have to be a little bit open that something's going to turn up that we have to add rather than subtract from budgets going forward. Yes, we have to pull them apart, but we have to be open to the fact there could be stuff turn up that we don't know about.
And I quite agree. I just don't want to find that it was in that report and we apparently approved it, which without us knowing. So the openness and transparentness is great. We just need to know all of those and be specific about whatever is. If it's not in the long-term plan, there needs to be a process to approve it.
Agree completely. Righto, unless there are further questions, I'd like someone to move that the Project Planning and Monitoring Committee receives the report Project Performance October 24. Mr. Baker, thank you. Seconder. Mayor Drysdale, would you like to speak?
I just appreciate the effort and their patience with us with answering all the questions from the staff this morning, and look forward to seeing some of the actions that were proposed in upcoming week.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you to all the teams that are out there, you know, actively trying to reduce budgets. It's good to hear, and obviously that's been the direction. So thank you for your work and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Do we have any debate on this issue at all? That being the case, I put the motion. Want me to read it again, or happy with it? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Next report, 9.2, Network Operations Report.
Just by way of introduction, we've got Martin and Mike coming up to present the paper, but it's maybe a little bit unusual that we report on maintenance and operations contracts to this committee, but we thought for your awareness and understanding of what we do out there on the network, you will see a lot happening on the network that is actually not capital projects or reported as part of the CapEx. So we suggested that to this meeting we take the Transport Networks Operation Report, and because it is a $20 million plus spend per year, it's quite an important part of what we do. I'm assuming that maybe not all of you are aware of what we actually do, the value of the asset, the number of jobs that we have going on out there. And then to the next project meeting, we're taking the Three Waters contract to give you an awareness of that, what's happening in that space. And this is all similar to what Greg and Barbara reported to you for the city ops as per last week. So I'll hand over to Mike and Martin.
Kia ora again, councillors. And as Nick's saying, this is definitely an important part of the business. It is where the government's currently focused in terms of a lot of expenditure, particularly through local government. And you'd have heard from sort of the popular, I guess, narrative at the moment around temporary traffic management, potholes, and those sorts of things that we see in the news. We'd like to give you a view of the full gamut of that. It's not just potholes, and it's just not just temporary traffic management. There's a whole bunch of other things that we'd like to sort of just let you know that we look after. And some of the community concerns that you get are actually dealt with through this process. So a lot of the small things that you might see as really important to the community will end up in this budget, potentially, depending on what it is. And it would be good to give you a sense of where that sort of spend is. So I'm going to hand over to Martin in a second, but I don't think Martin is very good at singing the team's praises. And he's probably not going to do it, so I'm going to. We've had some really good run with the work at the moment, and we've received quite a lot of great feedback from our Waka Kotahi audit process. So it's a process we get put through the ringer around the way that we perform, and it's external review by our partners on the spend that we make. And the team has done an excellent job. And to be fair, neither Martin nor myself were here for some of that work. So it's well worth saying that the team that's sitting in the office back at base are the team that sort of deserve the accolades and praise for this. And I just wanted to make that point straight up, is that those people are the ones who are driving value for money, listening to your feedback to us and that sort of thing, and they're the ones who kind of do the work. So it isn't us, it's them. and I'll let you go.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, everybody. Through you, Mr. Chair, look, it's a real pleasure to be able to just share with you some of what we do in the road maintenance space. It's the gardening and the lawn mowing, not the new alterations that happen. So it's the stuff that's just happens a little bit every day behind the scenes, and hopefully doesn't draw too much attention. Look, we've got a $2 billion asset in the roading space. Half of that's made up of the roads itself, and the other half is made up of all the associated assets. As you can see just from that little snapshot there, 14,000 streetlights. That's a fair number of streetlights to manage and renew. 800 odd retaining walls and bridges, and we've got over 600 kilometres of road. So it all requires, just like your house, a little bit of paint and touch up here and there. And every year we do a little bit of work to maintain the asset. Nick said around 20 million. We actually have, ideally, to maintain the asset at a level condition would be about 60 million a year. We, NZTA didn't quite have that much funding to co-fund us with this year. So we've got around about 48 million, I think, so the budget for the year. That's a significant improvement on historic funding where I think previously the road asset's been chronically underfunded, only at around 30 million a year. So we're really appreciative of the uplift in funding, and we've done a lot of work to reprioritise how to best invest that across the asset. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll just have a look at some of the work that we're doing. Mike did talk about the audit that we have had with NZTA recently. They do 2 audits. They do a procedural audit that looks at how we manage the network and how well we procure and how well we manage it financially. And then they have technical audits that look at how well are we doing the repairs, are we doing the work according to their technical specifications, etc. So you can see just from that summary table that NZTA and the very they're not overt in the way that they describe how well you're doing. So an effective is a very good score, and so we're really pleased to have that rating from NZTA. The area where it says there's a little bit improvement needed was in the road safety space. Generally, our crash stats are reducing, which is good. But on some of our high volume roads, they aren't reducing as much as the others. So they asked us to focus some of our future improvements on some of those roads to reduce those stats. So it was really for us just a good area to refocus where we look at our road safety. So we're really pleased with that audit. Next slide, please. So we've got 4 teams within the transport network operations space. The asset management team are the ones that really drive the programs of work. So they're the ones that create the asset management plan. They're the ones that identify the assets, measure them up, rate their performance, measure how well they're performing, and create the programs of work. And we use a whole range of smart tools that are available to all councils across the network generally, but we certainly utilise them. That vehicle up in the top left-hand corner, for example, has got a whole lot of laser sensors and cameras and other tools that drives down the road at normal driving speed and picks up all of the faults on the network and records and measures them and gives us a really good picture of what parts of the network are in good condition and what are poor. The little mobility scooter is something equivalent that we use just driving on our footpaths to assess the condition of the footpath. So there's a whole range of tools that we use out there. Next slide, please. So looking at some of the work that we're doing, the major work that we do every year is resurfacing. The surfacing on the road is for waterproofing and protecting the underlying structural pavement. So it's really important, just like it's important to paint the roof of your house every 10 years, to resurface the surface of our roads when they reach the end of their life. And the life of a surfacing is generally on average around 10 to 12 years. So that's about how often we try and renew the surfacing. Sometimes it doesn't look like it needs to be done when we do it, but we want to do it before it fails rather than after it fails. And it's always based on strong interrogation of the data that's been provided on the network. So this year we've got about 47 sites, about 7 kilometres of roads that we're resurfacing with asphalt, and that's a tennis court type material. One of the big projects that we did was Ocean Beach Road, and we've got another little report on that a little bit later. That was a great success story for us. 13,000 tonnes of hot mix being delivered on our network, so it's no small quantity.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you will note the missing decimal point on the second bullet point. It's not 72 7,200. There's only 12,000 kilometres of state highway in New Zealand.
Yes, 7.2.
So 7.2.
Next slide, please. We make the same point here. It's 18.5 kilometres of sealing that we're doing, not 18,000. 50 odd sites, so quite a few sites around the district. And these are the sites where it's existing chip seal, and we replace that with another coat of bitumen and chip seal. We're trialling alternative technologies as well that are coming onto the market recently because they provide opportunities for perhaps enhanced informants of our servicings going forward. So this year we're trialling 7 sites with a product called Fibre Deck, which has a little bit of reinforcing in the bitumen and just provides a more resilient surfacing and potentially longer life. So we're certainly up for trialling new products where we think it's going to deliver a more cost-effective benefit for us going forward. Next slide. As well as resurfacing, there are some pieces of road that reach the end of their life and we completely renew it. So we either do that if there's relatively good aggregate material in that road, then we can cement stabilise it, just reconstitute it by hoeing in a bit of cement and giving it a new lease of life. So we've got about 4,500 square metres of that proposed this year. And then there's some pavements that are not just surfaced with asphalt, but there's a whole thick layer of asphalt, and then we call it structural asphalt. And we've got about 7,000 square metres of that that we're doing this year as well. And those are generally in some of the industrial areas or CBD areas, total of around 5,000 tonnes. Next slide, please. So we did a survey of all the footpaths and identified a whole lot of trip hazards, and often that's where tree roots get underneath and just lift up the joint. It's only about an inch or two, and it can be a real hazard for particularly the elderly who get caught by those quite often. So we went around, identified all of those, and came up with something in the order of 1,300 of them. At the beginning of this season, those were all red. Those were all hadn't been completed. We got the contractor to bring in a grinding machine that just mills off that lip hazard and smooths the surface. And pretty pleased to say that the contractor really took that on board and ran with it at a sprint, and they sort of competed with themselves how much they could do each day, and I'm pretty pleased to say that we've just about completed that program, and just about all of those dots now, as you can see, yellow. So it's been a successful early completion. Next slide. There's also just other footpath maintenance we do where You know, there's bits of footpath that are crazy cracked and broken and just need wholesale repair. So we've been undergoing a program of those. A lot of those are identified through customer submissions that come in, and other ones through our condition assessment program. So around about 900 odd separate sections that we had in the program this year, and I think we're 3/4 of the way through, so progressing really well with that. Next slide, please. So another one of our teams is the corridor access team, and these are the ones that receive and approve all the traffic management plans that the contractors have to put in place, that are the bane of our life, particularly when there's so much work going on. But the traffic management does provide a safe work site, and it is an essential part of the contractor's health and safety requirements. One of the big projects that we do have this year, following on from central government's drives in this area, is looking at ways that we can perhaps get the contractor to refocus and review the way that they undertake traffic management. They've been working to date under a particular code of practice that's been very rules-based and very strict around how sites have to be laid out. They're moving away from that into what's called a new risk-based code, and that's more aligned. It's allowing them to be more aligned with meeting the obligations under the Health and Safety Act, but it will also enable them to think smarter around traffic management and to be able to apply hopefully measures of traffic management that might be leaner and more efficient. And we're looking forward to seeing how that pans out. We've been trialling some of that with some of the contractors already, and I'd just like to give you one quick example. When we line mark all of the intersections, all the give way and stop signs, it would take us about maybe 3/4 of an hour to set up all of the traffic management on the four corners of that intersection, to do about 10 minutes worth of line marking. So really inefficient in terms of the amount of traffic management, then the same time again to dismantle it. So a long time spent on setting it up and not much time doing the work. The contractor came up with an initiative to put traffic lights on 4 trucks and just drive them out to the 4 corners, turn them on red, do the work, turn them off, move on to the next site. And that initiative means that we can probably do about 4 times more sites in the same period of time as we used to. So, you know, that's just one good example of how this new code's going to perhaps bring efficiencies into that system for us. Next slide, please. So I guess just in general, this team is quite a high workload. We're dealing with around 1,000 odd requests to work on the road corridor every year, and every year there's a whole swaggin that are under review and currently active, and then a large number that are completed in the warranty period. We don't let the contractor off the hook after they're finished. We go back after 12 months and have a look at their site and make sure that it hasn't settled or done anything else untoward, and make sure that they come back and repair it. So we've got a number of those that are in the warranty period as well. So quite a busy team. Next slide, please. And then, of course, last but not least, we've got the TTOC team, and you've all been to see the TTOC Centre and seen their wall of TV cameras, and it's quite amazing the amount of work that they do to just monitor all of our traffic, monitor all of our intersections, make sure all the traffic lights are coordinated and in sync and working well together. And on top of that, they also look after all of our street lights. I don't know if you're aware, but each one of our 14,000 street lights has got a little dome on the top that reports information on the performance of that light back to TTOC. So they get an alert whenever a light's not working or has some other fault and they're able to go out and repair it based on that information. So a lot of really smart intelligence and smart technology has been utilised by that team. Next slide, please. Rich would also want me to say the last point on that slide is that they've got a big move happening to relocate that TTOC into the new building, and it's a massive undertaking, but Richard's got that well in hand. So the team also looks at new technologies and how we can apply them. And just one little one that we're looking at the moment is the problem with signs and things that warn the public is they become blasé to them. You don't see them, and suddenly a person's crossing the intersection and you haven't realised that you're there. There's technology and people need to be alerted, need to have their attention redrawn to what's happening in front of them. So some of the technology that's available is when someone's about to walk across a crossing, you can put little LEDs leading up to it that flash so that when cars coming up are alerted by this flash of light in front of them and draws their attention to the fact that there's something on the crossing or people on the crossing in front of them. So we're trialling some of those technologies through this coming year. Next slide, please. Again, streetlight renewals undertaken by the TTOC team, and we've got a program underway this year to renew a significant number of those as required. Next slide, please. Another little program that we have is some of the older subdivisions didn't have the lighting spaced quite far apart, a lot further apart than current lighting spacings. And where there's an opportunity and where there's a need, then we've got a small budget to provide some infill lighting on some of those areas. This year, Royal Ascot Drive's been considered for an additional 6 infill lights to help just improve the pedestrian lighting through there. Next slide, please. That's us. Thank you very much.
Councillor School.
Thank you. A really good overview. Thank you. And I love all the numbers. Just a question on new technologies. As a biker, I change my route sometimes because if there's not any cars, the lights won't change for me. I noticed when I was in Christchurch, they've got some new technology that provided you are on that piece of the road, the lights will acknowledge that and change for you. Is that something we're looking at in Tauranga?
I'm not sure specifically, but I know Richard's all over that sort of technology, and I'm sure we have been looking at it. I'll need to get you some detail on that.
Baker.
Kia ora. On slide 81, sorry, page 81, slide on network operations delivery footpath maintenance. Why is Welcome Bay left till last? No, I'm just kidding. Just looking at all the red dots, well, I think they look purple on mine, but I'm assuming they're meant to be red, so to be completed. Is that work quite disruptive, or is that one of those kind of, like the grinding down of bits and bobs? Is that pretty non-disruptive?
When we're replacing, through you, Mr. Chair, when we're replacing whole sections of footpath, it can be disruptive. But part of what the contractor is required to do is to provide an alternative path, direct the pedestrians across the other side of the road, or provide a safe passageway just out on the adjacent road for them to pass by.
So you mentioned that some of that work is due to like trees unearthing or unrooting footpaths. I assume those are trees that are like close to the footpath, which is TCC owned. Is that what you would say?
That's correct.
Is that something we need to stop doing? Just as a preventative measure to help keep costs low, the impact of our infrastructure as least disruptive as possible, and or are there alternative measures to provide the canopy while not impacting our assets like that? Does that make sense then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just at a global level, there's a trade-off. And so where trees and footpaths and transport infrastructure have to coexist, particularly in urban centres, the root bowl and whatnot. There's ways of trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. They're generally expensive though, in terms of trying to control the root system of a tree. And older suburbs and whatnot, there's probably less thought being put into that. And I think the types of trees are chosen so that they generally don't do that. But there's always cases where that might happen. So a maintenance of a footpath in 10 years' time, after the tree's been there for a long time and it provides that sort of shade and look and feel to the suburb is one of those sorts of trade-offs that quite often get made. It does get pushed into the future. However, I don't know that it's a systemic issue of such quantity that we would probably change things too much around that one.
I just see a lot of yellow dots. That looks like a lot of work and a lot of money.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, they're not all but from trees. It's from just general wear and tear, trucks driving over stuff and smashing things, and there are things, particularly footpaths, they get broken a lot, and the trees are not the responsible party on a lot of those. It's other things, but it's certainly something that we work with our places and spaces team to make sure that when we do put in trees, particularly from here on out, that we do it with a practice that means that we preserve the asset.
Correct.
Firstly, congrats, if I can echo the Mayor's previous comment around looking for efficiencies and cost savings. I'm glad to hear that. But in terms of the appearance of the city, just generally, I think most visitors to Tauranga would rate us as looking fairly smart across the board. Few little niggles here and there, I imagine, but one I've sort of come across is the state of some of the signage. It's starting to look a bit ratty, because it's stuck on the edges of fraying and it's still legible, but looking quite ratty. And I think they're probably particularly on the state highways. I understand TCC would monitor and address those, but perhaps I'm wrong. And it's nice to hear the comment around the government, focusing away from the nice to haves to the essentials and looking after what we already have, which is part of this council's one of our key objectives. So in terms of the signage, is that regularly monitored? And actually, when you go enter into another town, the city, it's something I've really noticed. The signage is like mouldy, dirty, and you think, where's the pride in those communities, particularly if they're like the council sign or whatever, welcoming, but just in general. So I think it shows the importance of just looking tidy and making sure things are well maintained. So it's a bit of a lengthy question. I've got a few comments in there, but yeah, no response required actually, because I'm sure it's on your list of things to do. But yeah, I just thought I'd point that out. Thank you very much. In the end.
Yes, Shula.
Thanks for that report, guys. Just quickly on page 75, I just noticed down the bottom you've got the cycleways, but just a bit of blank and a fast cyclist. Just curious about obviously cycleways and walkways, and that a big part of what we look after and that as well. What is the value of that asset? Do we know, or just? If not, that's fine.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can get you that number. It might have actually just fallen off the slide, I think, in terms of we definitely have cycleways as assets and they are worth something, but we'll come back to you with that number.
Schooler.
Thank you. Just going back to footpaths, I've noticed walking around that when there are new builds, some new builds take the liberty of changing the slope of the footpath to suit their driveway, particularly at the Mount where there are going down or going upwards, and it's quite noticeably unfunctional for the person on the footpath. And I when you were talking about the fact that TCC owns all of those, what's the rule and how do we monitor and manage the fact that if you've got a driveway going on a new build or a renovation, what's the rule about putting it back to be even with the rest of the driveway, please, or the footpath, please?
I haven't seen too many examples of that here in Tauranga, but certainly in my previous role as the riding manager in Whakatane, the principle was a footpath. Slope and line had to continue, and your driveway had to conform around it. And oftentimes you'd get the builder or the developer just putting a new smooth line straight through that would, as you say, create that variance in the crossing for the on the footpath, and that's not ideal.
I can offer to send you some photos.
Rather.
Yeah, I might send you some photos too. I'm just curious, like in that situation though, how much interaction with the council takes place beforehand, and where does the cost fall, or how does it play out? If we send some photos and you go, right, that doesn't look good, what actually needs to happen and who pays for it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just from a starting point perspective, every time that a new house or requirement for a new driveway or where it crosses our infrastructure or asset, there's usually a building consent and a resource consent, a regulatory process by which transport team is drawn into the conversation. So where there are times where they cross the footpath, there's a process by which we should be looking at that as a transport team. There are some basic rules, like Martin says, and our regulatory teams do know those. There's been quite a lot of development in Tauranga over the years, and perhaps there are some examples where that fall and crossfall wasn't sort of well looked at, perhaps. So any of those examples are good for us to know and understand the extent of the problem. So there is a regulatory process around that. Transport team does have a look at those, and we generally make sure that the footpath is kept and left in the way that it was to be designed, which is to have a horizontal, access across the front of the driveway. And unfortunately, I think sometimes it hasn't happened. From our perspective, if they cause the change, they pay for it. And they have to meet a standard around that change. So that's the process. With regard to retrospective change, it's going to be very difficult to do that. The government is no longer funding footpath renewals or improved footpaths as part of its GPS commitments. And so our footpath program will be much reduced. So we will be reacting to customer queries, but we will not be able to react in the same way we have done in the last three years, and we'll be able to only sort of address some of the more serious issues. And I think that's going to play out over the next 3 years, particularly when our customers tell us about things. And we're going to need to prioritise that as a program. So those are the kind of decisions that this committee will be able to see, and we'll be bringing choices around that type of thing moving forward. But to understand the extent of the problem would be our first step.
Thank you, Mike. Looking to move on. So if there's no further questions, can I have someone move that Project Planning and Monitoring Committee receives the report 2024-25 Network Operations Report? Councillor Curry, Councillor Crowther. Any further discussion, or you guys like to speak to the motion? All those in favour? It's carried. Minded it's time for a bit of a break. If we could be back here at 11:45.
into the program.
Can I have your attention? We'll get back on track. Just noting Councillor Baker's had to leave for an emergency, so we'll be without him for the moment. Also conscious of time, the meeting has to be completed by 12:30, so we're going to try and go through a couple of the smaller items, and then we may adjourn and do the walkthrough of the laneway site, as suggested by Councillor Swooler, which I think is a good idea for those that haven't seen it. And then potentially we'll re-adjourn and talk about the laneway at a later time. Depending on how we go with the emergency meeting that we have to attend. So, right, if we just move on to the next item, which is Ocean Beach resurfacing. Who's going to talk for that? Mike?
Depending on the time, in the interest of time, we're happy to just take the report as read, not go through the presentation, but answer any questions if there are any.
Councillor Correct.
Thank you. In terms of the life cycle of chip seal, not chip seal, hot mix. It's on. Sorry, I just need to get a bit closer to the mic. The longevity of the hot mix material, and we talked about the what is it, I recall that was resealed. That project was done probably about, jeepers, would it be 8 years ago potentially? When was that section of Ocean Beach Road last redone? Or as we get older, years go by a lot quicker. When was that done?
Through Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I don't know when it was previously sealed. I'll have to get that information to you.
Thanks. So I think up on the screen we saw about 10 to 12 years. Is that right? Now versus hot mix is a lot lesser time frame in terms of its longevity. Is that correct or not?
A lot of it depends on environmental factors, the amount of traffic on it, and just the impacts of sun and weathering, and so it's very hard to pin an exact sort of life really. But on average, chip seals are around 10 years, and hot mix surfacings, all going well, you might get the same out of them, but sometimes it's only about 8.
Great, thanks for reminding me about that. Now, also not on Ocean Beach Road in particular, but Patmar Beach Road, there's a big desire from that community to upgrade a big length of Patmar Beach Road. Is that on the cards?
Yes, most definitely, but not this year. It got a bit of an intervention seal last year, which is just going to give us a few more years life out of it. Doesn't look pretty, but it's functional and it's waterproof, and it's just going to allow us to put a little bit more effort into how we design and construct that piece of pavement, because again, it's a long piece. It's going to require a long detour. There's going to be a whole lot of locals disrupted by it. So we just want to get that one right as well. So another year to think about that is helpful for us.
Right. Thank you. We won't talk about Patmar, but Ocean Beach, please. Mayor Drysdale.
Yeah, I'd just be keen to understand, you obviously decided to do Ocean Beach Road, but you were sort of mentioning before that you want to do it before it, actually breaks up. But so obviously that machine, does the car that drives along, is that sort of part of the analysis, or how do you decide that this is got another 2 years in it, or it has to be done kind of now?
It's a very cunning mix of using the data and analysing the data and engineering judgment. The experience of somebody looking at the site and knowing from their experience how much life is left in it. So it's very much a balance of the two, hand in glove kind of approach.
And through you, Mr Chair, Wakaotahi also do the same thing with us. So they are very interested in making sure their pavements, you get the maximum life out of them as well. So we also have to pass muster with regard to what they see in our pavement as well.
I've just got a quick question. Having not driven over there very much in recent times, but reading your paper, is this what good looks like as far as a project and how it went for us?
Short answer, and through you, Mr Chair, is yes. The main points around this one here is the way that we engage with the community on delivering on this, and our approach to a very, very busy piece of Tauranga's transport network. So for us, was bells and whistles in terms of letting people know, working with the community, not setting too high expectations or low, and sort of pitching it so that we were able to do it. So you saw that we were able to save time. Part of that is a risk contingency around weather. So we had some good weather. So that helped with that, but it's really important to set expectations with our community about what's possible and then deliver it. So, it's the old adage around, over deliver it and under promise a little sometimes. So you may see that when we do these other things in other places. And that's the approach that we'll take with particularly these busy arterials that we have in Tauranga.
Through you, Mr Chair, if I just might add to that. One of the important stories out of that piece of road was if we'd done it traditionally with minimal impact on the community, it would have probably taken us 3 times as long, maybe 6 weeks instead of 2 weeks. Minimal disruption to the locals. They would have had access to their properties every day, but it would have slowed our progress. And what we gained by the consultation we had with the locals was convincing them that to accept a reasonable level of disruption over a shorter period of time, and we coupled that with enabling the work crews to start early and finish later. So they started, I think, about 6 and went through the evening, finishing maybe 9 or 10, and getting the locals to buy into that as well. And that enabled us to really shorten down the construction period and get the works done with higher initial disruption, but overall shorter time frame. And that's a methodology we'd like to use more often, looking at closing off pieces of road so we can get in and out as quick as possible and then opening it back up again. So maybe initial greater disruption to the public, but overall less overall disruption.
So Crowther?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. Well done on that project. Just with regard to the asphalt versus the chip seal, I just checked my memory with a paper authorised in 2021 by Nicholas Johansson, which was talking about the 2 options. Can you clarify, just because there might well be people hearing what was said and maybe misunderstanding. My understanding is that asphalt will last longer in the same situation in most environmental circumstances. What you said was perhaps a lower number of years. I presume what you were meaning, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that it will last maybe a little bit less time because of the number of vehicles using those roads, because you only put hot mix onto those kind of roads, and therefore it has more wear and tear, and therefore it doesn't last as long. Can you clarify that? Because otherwise we will have a lot of people probably coming to us saying, it conflicts with previous council.
Right, yeah. I'm not too sure of the information on the paper that you said, but certainly if you had 2 roads with exactly the same volume of traffic on it, one in chip seal and one in hot mix, the hot mix one may last longer because it's a little bit more like concrete, and the bitumen doesn't oxidize to the same extent as it does on the chip seal. So on a like-for-like pavement, that could well be the case, yes.
Moving on, I'd like to have someone move that the Project Planning and Monitoring Committee receives the report Ocean Beach Road resurfacing. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is 9.4, decision-making process for property demolition or removal.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This is a paper in response to a request from the committee, just wanting to understand how we went through the process of deciding that a property needs to be demolished. So we've got Amanda and Ross here who can respond to questions, and also in accordance with efficiencies, Amanda will be here for the next paper as well, which will give the committee an update on the Monmouth work that we've got. So if you're okay with that, she can just go straight on to that.
Great, thank you. Just letting you know, I had some interest from the community who gave par when we were talking about the new community centre, and they were wondering what happens to the buildings that's currently on the site. So that's how this paper got here.
Yeah, well, we're happy to take the paper as read and answer any questions.
One clarification, and it's just prompted a conversation Councillor and I had, is the gate power as a case study.
Questions to the paper, anyone? Must be a great paper, it's self-explanatory. Righto. Can I have someone to move that the Project Planning and Monitoring Committee receives the report, residential property, decision-making process for property demolition or removal? Councillor Roseboom and Councillor Schooler, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Oh.
So we had a short update, I guess, at the last PPM, just around some activity that was happening on site. And we said we'd come back with, I guess, the project detail, which is contained in the current paper, and what some of the next steps that will be up on that site. So I've got Christine Wildhaber here with me today, who's the project manager, if you've got any specific, I guess, questions around the project, but I'm happy to take, there's quite a bit of detail in that paper, so I'm happy to take the paper as read.
Thank you, Amanda. Do we have any questions? I did have a question. I'm just wondering, during the process, is there any upgrade on the footpath coming from the end of the Strand up to the site? Ramp sort of coming up from the Strand end.
That goes alongside the railway edge, and there's a footpath that goes up past the police station.
The railway edge.
Yeah, so that's where we're proposing to put a boardwalk. So the initial steps that going up, there's no proposal to change that, but there's a portion where the concrete finishes. So there's a proposal to add a boardwalk to that eastern side.
Councillor Crowther.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's great to see this project because it's a crucial part of our Māori and colonial history. I guess I had a question in regards to, like, when I look at the renders and things, I guess I kind of go, oh no, we're losing the character of the place to some extent. And I'm just wondering, it's hard to convey that in just a few images. And I know you have to put a boardwalk in to protect certain aspects of it, but you know, can there be any assurance that you're trying to keep the sort of, if you like, the raw nature of it, which was quite appealing. Certainly, you know, as kids, people tend to love it when there's not too much manicured kind of end result there. So is that something that can be done to some extent while still ensuring that you, protect this historic site?
Yeah, I don't think that's working. Can you hear me all right? So naturally those slopes will end up being cut to quite a reasonably long level, so it will look more natural. So it won't be manicured and cut really tightly because that would encourage more erosion. So I suppose it will just have to wait and see when it does. But at the moment, it's deteriorating and the punga's coming off. And we investigated a number of opportunities and or different ways to do it, and that was the best outcome and the one that Heritage New Zealand would agree with in terms of approach.
Any further question? Councillor Schuler?
Thank you, through the chair. Nothing major, but is there any plans just within this to sort of create a couple of lookouts or something that's coming back over the city or out across the harbour or?
Because of the trees that are being removed, it will open out the views, and that was a key thing that the hapu wanted, because that was a key lookout point on the Kiwi Rail, because it just with Kiwi Rail land, and on the bank there, we wouldn't be able to take out any more of the vegetation further on that side, but there will be viewpoints once the boardwalk goes through.
Schooler.
And this is, sorry, not a question, but I just want to say that I think it's great doing it, and having been at the Rose Garden a couple of times, hopefully it also means we get more movement out of the city through here and into the Rose Garden, which is stunning if anyone hasn't seen it lately.
That was a great non-question. Righto, I'll ask somebody to move that the Project Planning and Monitoring Committee receives the report, project update, Monmouth Redoubt. Councillor Schooler and Schuler. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Just given the shortage of time that we have, we will skip 9.6, Durham Street to Grey Street Laneway Project, and move on to 9.7, Transport Program Prioritization Method. And we'll ask Mike to come and join us again.
Kia ora, councillors. I'm happy also to take the report as read. Just a few opening comments around the prioritisation methodology is an adapted process for reconstituting the transport program as a result of the changes in the LTP levels, the changes in the NLTP levels of funding. And then also the imperative to make sure that we remain within our annual plan target limits for financial year 25 and 26. So as you can see from the paper, we've stepped out what the distillation process is for the strategic intent of all those documents, and then moving through to actual prioritisation. The short story is that because of those two preconditions, there isn't a heck of a lot to prioritise in terms of the program, and the effect of the prioritisation methodology is rather minimal with regard to projects that have already started under contract or we have a partner commitment with a very small part of the program. However, it is important to have a think about this paper with regard to the financial year 27, where our council has more choices, and we would propose that this methodology that we've established here be carried through to the next NLTP, whereby the next RLTP process and the next NLTP process will overwrite this, and then they will become far more aligned with the RLTP and NLTP moving forward, and council's strategic objectives as it forms over the next two years or so. So this is a pieced together set of logic for us to be able to prioritise and stay within the kind of the boundary conditions for our funders and ourselves.
Then, Mike, can we take the report as read? So questions, people? Mayor Drysdale.
Thank you. Going back to the Lakes bus stop, I just noticed there's two. So this is the bus facility, Tauranga Crossing. You've got 26 budget, 16 million, and then 27, 5.5. Is that the full Tarakura upgrade, or is that just for the bus stop? Because again, that looks very expensive compared to Arataki.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's for the full upgrade. So what you're seeing there is us producing a forecast for an annual plan process. And we've had to consider, as mentioned before, things like the contingency element. And so for us, we have shown that what we think the spend profile is for that particular project over the next 2 years. So as is what to do, infrastructure projects spill over in the years. And so the second part of that bill will be in the financial year 27. So in the paper, you've got a chart there, which is the on section 17, I think it is, which shows you the sort of the value of each year's worth of program. Inside those bars are the projects as they go through time. So if you have a look at that particular chart, financial year 27, whilst the total target spend from an annual plan perspective is yet unconfirmed, the flow-on effects or cash flow that moves into the future as a result of those projects is of that order of magnitude. And so that just shows you the way that the program moves through time. And it's quite rightly a bit of a bell curve. With regard to that specific question, that's what we consider that we will need in financial year 26 and 27. Now, as that project travels through time, we will test the assumptions and risks in that project. As Cameron said earlier, we'll seek to reduce those costs, normalise those budgets, and you'll start to see more sensible forecasts flowing through into these types of documents. But for the imperative that is making sure that we fit in the financial year 26 annual plan, we've made some adjustments to cash flow and forecast, and that's what you're seeing through those particular projects.
A follow-up, just on the Cambridge Road intersection upgrade, again, you know, it's about $50 million there for that part, which it seems like a lot of money for an intersection, but is that for a much wider project?
Correct. It's a wider level of expenditure that includes a bigger scope in there. So what happens in particular with the way the transport program is put together is we often have to break up projects into slightly different line items, and you'll see them travel through. It is our intent to normalise that as we go forward in time, but at the moment you'll see several streams of money flowing together into what we talk about as one project. Unfortunately, it doesn't come through in the system that way. So that is a wider scope than just an intersection improvement. It is, however, quite a costly space to build big pieces of infrastructure up in Taurika, and particularly on the escarpment there. So they are significant cost items for us to consider.
Final question was just on the what is the Safe Network program? Is that a whole lot of various projects, or exactly what does that involve?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct. It's a program of small activities. It's the program where you would have found a lot of road safety platforms before. And again, we've gone through that program and reprioritised to make sure that it's more focused on the current GPS and levels of expenditure. But you get signalised pedestrian crossings. There are components in the that are ITS-based bus jumps and a whole bunch of small things. So there is a list of all the individual projects, and again, because of the way we code our projects, they get built up into one line item, and it'll become more evident once we flow through this financial year about the individual line items. We can provide more detail if required.
Thank you. You've answered all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks. The hospital public transport hub, I guess the first part is, what are we getting for the 120 odd thousand, which obviously isn't a lot of money in the scheme of things. I presume, is that some design or scoping or something?
For you, Mr. Chair, yes. Very early design and a very small response in that space. Just a step back, particularly with the smaller projects, the transport team had some choices to make around what it would do in the future. Some of the projects that are in here are design phases, which is why they look quite cheap, but we have not allowed for the implementation phase, and there are some in here like that. And that's so that we can prime the pump of the program and not have a collapse necessarily of momentum. So in any good programming world, you need a pipeline, and those design phases form the part of that pipeline. And these were projects that were considered as things that were strategically right in the middle of all of the Venn diagram that is strategy, that we should progress going forward. And as a community, we had lots of support for as well. So there are a number of projects in that category.
Second question was Cameron Road Stage 1. What is the 1.2 million in the 26 financial year relating to? Is that to do with the bus lane implementation, or is it something else?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'll let Nick jump in at any time he likes. It's a provision for us to close the project that is Cameron Road Stage 1 out. So there are some costs associated with finishing, and that's to make sure that we're able to cover those costs depending on the requirements of closeouts. So as you well know, that project was of a certain kind in terms of a JV, and we need to negotiate and make sure that we ticked all the boxes. So in every project, there's a closeout period called defects liability, and we are looking to make sure that what we purchased and what we got, if there is a gap, one, we can afford to pay for it, and or the contractor is going to make good on that. So it is something that hangs around in the cash flow until the project is completely closed. You will find that other projects have similar things, particularly if they're very technical. And Cameron Road was a very large project.
My last question was with regards to the arterial route implementation. It sounded to me when I heard that earlier this year, that was quite a critical project, particularly in terms of delivery of the 15th Ave Turret Road project. That they, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they go together a bit to try and fast track some of the improvements to cater for the traffic jams we're going to get. So I'm just looking at the numbers there, and I guess I'm just wanting to get a little bit of an understanding, because you've stuck 6.6 million into FY26, which makes sense in that context, and 2.4 the following year. So what could we get for the 6.6 that could be timely to help? Is it Fraser Street, I guess?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that is an early forecast. The team are going through the sort of feasibility phase of arterial route review. The tactic around our investment stack from the last NLTP period was to break it up into a series of smaller projects. The team have just completed the modelling associated with that. So not just with 15th Avenue, but with Cameron Road Stage 2 potentially. But this also picks up the modelling associated with the Wapukutahi works in Tauriko. And so as you well know, any major project that sits on the system for any great length of time has a serious implication for the people travelling in the system. And this project was to try and use Fraser Street as a way of alleviating some of that demand. That's a long way of saying we don't quite know what we'd like to do there to have a material impact on that. But we anticipated that at minimum, we would need to improve the way that traffic flowed through those, particularly the intersections. And those costs represent changes to intersections predominantly. We're not ready yet to bring that to council around a fully formed scope. But at this stage, that is a minimum level of expenditure on that corridor, depending on the impact. And of course, we'll have to follow the right process, due process, in order to do that, given the timing of the major projects that are in train, as well as the decision around other parts of the program. I think just to add to that, this is absolutely a great example of the programmatic nature of transport, is that there's so many interdependencies that your cash flow relies on other things happening. And so the risks that are associated with your spend and the projects that can be delivered often have flow-on impacts into other things. So the relief to that is the understanding of that program on a regular basis, what's changed, what's going to happen, what we think is going to happen, and risk adjusting that program through time. So this is what this committee would, I think, seek to see from us, and why we start talking in 3-year periods and 10-year periods rather than yearly periods. The yearly conversation is devoid of the other context. So hence why this paper is here around the wider view.
And just needs to be a very quick answer, is there a chance we can get NZTA funding within the current 3 years for the arterial routes? Or is that all on us? Well, ratepayers, I guess.
At this stage, we have, going to say tacit support for that project. And the implications and disbenefits felt by the major projects are on the highway system as well. So we have yet to work that through and to understand where, I guess, the disbenefit lies. We've done the modelling now, and now it's part of the project to go and talk with our partners, Western Bay included, and the Regional Council, of course, around, well, what is our response to something as big as perhaps 15th Avenue or Cameron Road Stage 2 sitting on the network for multiple years. And we all know how the Tomo on State Highway 29 affected travel for a day. And so those are the sorts of things that we absolutely need to go through and bottom out.
Thank you, Mike. Can I get somebody to move? This one's a bit longer. That the Project Planning and Monitoring Committee receives the report Transport Program Prioritization Method, endorses the proposed prioritization method to be used in establishing an updated transport program, and C, notes that a further report will be provided in December 24 containing the updated transport program. Have a mover? Councillor Crowther, seconder Councillor Schuler. Any further discussion? Councillor Crowther?
Yeah, I think it's a really good report, and I guess for me that arterial route one is quite critical because I'm very conscious that we're going to spend a few years building a very important project, and I am a little worried, as Mike said, it's probably at the lowest possible end of what it might take, seeing what it costs just to do one intersection of traffic lights and things. So as we come through to the FY26 annual plan, I can see the tension that's there. We're trying to get value for money. We're putting the pressure on staff. At the same time, we're going to have a massive amount of feedback. Even if we do it the best possible way, we're still going to have a lot of feedback from the public complaining about this project in the short term, hopefully praising it in the long term. So I guess we're going to have to just work our way through that. But I think we need to, in my view, sort of make it clear to staff that we have to have realistic cost updates around what it's all looking like, and then we can make the decisions from there. But yeah, you're really helpful. I would also just, I will come back to staff with a couple of specific projects down and those unable to fit within targets. But I think as long as we keep the conversation going there, we can work our way through those if funding becomes available.
Any further discussion? Move the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, at this point, I'll adjourn the meeting. The final item we'll come back to at a time to be confirmed. Not sure when that'll be, but we have an emergency meeting at 1 o'clock, so thank you all.